Congratulations on the movie.
Thank you.
This movie, sports movies, not really about the sports. It's about ghosts, but it's not about whether ghosts exist or not. What's your take on it? I thought that it was more about why people choose to believe in something, and not ghosts or religion or whatever it is.
Whatever it is, really. No, that's exactly what I thought when I read it. I thought actually it's about an age-old need to understand that there's more things in heaven and earth than dreamt of in our philosophy, and specifically, I thought it was actually about grief, which is often, I think, what a lot of horror movies are about, strangely, and a lot of ghost movies are about, which is very obviously human territory, so it's interesting.
Well, it's the sense of loss, I think, and that idea that maybe somehow it's comforting if we believe that the person that we loved
might still be there around
us somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, why is it then that your character, who's had a catastrophic loss in the film due to the Second or the First World War, why is it, do you think, that she doesn't believe in ghosts or doesn't want to believe in ghosts?
Well, because I suppose some people will deal with, grief does extreme things to people, and some people will deal with it by wanting that comfort, and some people will deal with it by being incredibly harsh on themselves and not allowing them any comfort. And she's, I think, quite self-flagellating in a way. So there's the sense that if she can be absolute about everything, then she can deal with these emotions that are out of control in her. If she can absolutely prove that when you die, and that's it, and we should all just stop worrying about it, then she'll get over her grief better. As a sort of, tough, what's the expression I'm looking for?
She's a tough cookie.
It's
a hard shell?
No, there's an expression I'm looking for that will come to me in a minute. I always lose all power of articulation in interviews. You just suddenly go, where are my words?
I'll fill in the words later.
Good. Yeah, exactly. I don't know why I'm worrying. In print, you can say what you want.
And then we danced.
Exactly. She's very harsh on herself and punishing in a way, and being rigid and dogmatic and not allowing any sort of spiritual comfort is part of that sort of harshness.
It's almost. Is it almost like her wearing a hair shirt or something, or you know what I mean? Like
it is a little bit.
Yeah,
and it's a way of dealing with grief and pain, is to kind of be sort of cold about it. Then it's easier to deal with, especially because she's so emotional. Really, I mean that actually was one of the great things about her as a character, and I thought this is an unusual character because she's not a rigid intellectual. She actually isn't. She's an incredibly emotional being who's sort of made herself into this rigid intellectual in order to deal with all of her emotions, and she doesn't really know herself, and that's an incredibly challenging thing to play as an actress, someone that has no sense of who they really are and works it out by the end of the,
Well, she has quite an arc. I mean, there's quite a story here, and
quite an extreme.
We can only talk about it to a point. But she starts off when we first meet her, she's rich, she's successful, she's an unusual in that she's single, and at the time, 1921. But she's also, when the dean comes to see her and says, "We want you to come and explore this," she's kind of cold, dismissive, and like sort of businesslike with him. And then we just slowly start to learn. I think one of the pleasures of this movie is that we just slowly start to learn little bits and pieces about all the characters, but particularly about her. And then all of a sudden, the floodgates open.
And
that must have been very appealing for you.
Oh, it was incredibly appealing because it was really about doing things the challenge was, for a start, I've never been asked to do anything in my acting that's required anything beyond the realms of what we understand, like the sort of normal domestic drama sort of situation, which will endlessly fascinate me. Any sort of psychological realism, fantastic, but to do sort of psychological extra realism was kind of something that I'd never done before, and I thought, well, that's the next challenge, is to work out someone who's in emotional excess and extremity, and find out how little you can do, and find out the measure, because it was a, like, doing the performance was a sort of making a puzzle out of measuring out what you needed to play at any given moment in order to keep the mind trap going and keep the narrative intact, and also to allow it to be held up for a couple more viewings, because there are certain things that you sort of understand better the second time.
Well, yeah, this is the kind of movie I think that I would imagine that you have to stick really closely to the script, as you say, to keep that sort of mind trap going, because if you have a better idea or a different idea later on, you go, you know what, we can't do this because then that earlier part doesn't make sense. No, it was difficult. It was difficult to hold all that in my head and make sense of it and try and make it real and not just make it about, heavy breathing, screaming acting. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Like the Hammer scream, like Barbara Steele or something. For a character like this, did you do research into spiritualism, or was that not terribly necessary for you?
I did quite a bit, actually, only because it was interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right?
Because it was such a sort of interesting time in British history, because we're so... Yeah, please do. Because we're so not a nation that's particularly prone to the fantastical. We're quite... Culturally, England's always known for being quite earthbound and realistic. I suppose America's got a better reputation for being taken in by that type of thing. But this is a time in England that was really peculiar in that it was enormously popular. Seances, spiritualism, anything that was kind of outside of the occult, all this kind of stuff was big business. And there's a lot of stuff written about it, and it's really interesting.
Well, I think of Arthur Conan Doyle, wrote a great deal about it. He believed in it. I mean, he believed in little fairies that lived in the garden and the whole thing. I mean, and I do find it kind of endlessly fascinating. I mean, the very real reason that it all happened, I guess, is because of the great loss of the war. And in our other interview, so what was it? You threw a statistic out to me. I mean, or no, perhaps it was just that.
The statistic in the movie is about like the. Well, the statistic that I kept using in my head was the fact that you don't find in that period in history you literally wouldn't come across a single person that wasn't in mourning for somebody that didn't have a direct member of their family dead from the war. You just wouldn't come across a single person, and if you walk down, a street in central London, you wouldn't see any men in their 20s. Right. Or their 30s, pretty much. And you'd see women pushing prams with no husbands everywhere. I mean, it was a peculiar time for that. And, a time that, thankfully we won't repeat. Because that kind of warfare is different now.
Well, it's interesting because in the opening couple of scene in the film is a seance, and you debunk, you show how the wick was pulled out of a candle, which is a very cool trick, and all that stuff. And then one of the women, though, even though you have completely proven that this was a farce, is angry with you because she just wanted that comfort, whether it was real or not. And that I thought was fascinating.
Well, that's sort of that's the crux of all of these things, is that ultimately it doesn't, everyone keeps asking me, do you believe in ghosts? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter whether any of us believe in ghosts or not. The point is the idea of them serves a purpose for humanity, whether it's dealing with the idea of death and the afterlife and our fear of death and all these things. I mean, they're just a sort of a cultural trope that's as important as, the idea of heroism or, all these things. It's a very, very, and it's that quote of, if God didn't exist, we'd invent him. But it's kind of, it's a similar sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I think, quite honestly, along that line, we, the idea of the afterlife and all that is man-made. I mean, there's absolutely not a shred of evidence that exists anywhere to suggest that any of that exists. But, it is odd, and I'm not going to ask you whether you believe in ghosts, because I know that everyone on the planet has asked you that already. And I think you're probably done with that. But for me, I had just such an odd experience one day walking down Bloor Street, which is a major street up here, and there was a woman in a purple jacket walking across the street, clearly not paying attention. It was a busy street, clearly not paying attention to the traffic. And I thought, she's insane, something's happened. And I went to run towards her, but to run towards her, I looked down for a second. When I looked up, she was gone. And I have no idea what it means, right? Ghost, maybe, I don't know, or, I have no idea. And I don't believe in ghosts, but I think just weird stuff happens sometimes. I
think that I am absolutely sure that 90% of what we think is mysterious and spooky now will be science in 50 years.
Right.
There's so much more that we don't understand.
Well, I'm sure gravity blew cavemen's minds. You know what I mean? Like,
no. But stuff like that, if you gave an iPhone to a caveman, they'd think, that they were being attacked by a demon. It's,
Well, think about even, Star Trek. You watch the original Star Trek shows. We have all that stuff now.
No, I know.
All that stuff, so,
it's the same sort of thing, and I'm always struck by that thing that quote, I can't remember what the quote is exactly, but there's something that Freud said on his deathbed when he said, if you could do it over again, what would you, is there anything that you missed? And he said, I'd look into telepathy, because I think that the energy between people is so much bigger than we understand. And I'm absolutely sure of that, and also on a scientific level, energy does transfer, it doesn't die. So, there's got to be something that's kind of going on there to explain all these things that are and then get that plus what imagination does, which is an incredibly powerful force. Then, of course, you've got all sorts of things.